Good day, everyone. Welcome to the third day of our symposium of hunters and gatherers. Thank you so much for coming. I would like to deliver our thanks for your kind coordination on registering. This is the last day, and thank you for being very much on time. My name is Christine. I'm hosting from Selasar Sunario Art Space. Before we open the symposium with LIR, I would like to note down several points for technical housekeeping. This is a safe space for everyone. Kindly respect and nurture the space for anyone who joins, and please turn off your audio input at all time. We will be having the Q&A session later on, and please deliver your questions and inquiries during the session on the Q&A chat box, or maybe just the chat box if you'd like to ask to all of the panelists. I will be rereading them for the moderators. And also, please find other details at our link 3/pollination3, or maybe you can also visit the websites that are now screening of huntersandgatherers.com. I will leave the beginning to LIR. Thank you so much for coming. Please.
Welcome, everybody, to the third and last day of Hunters and Gatherers Symposium. We are LIR, and my name is Mira Asnetias.
And I am Dito Yuwono.
Together with Kittima Chareeprasit, we curated the third edition of Pollination, titled Of Hunters and Gatherers. This edition is composed of an exhibition, a symposia, and dedicated website. Along the way, the project growing not only presented in other formats, but also involve more people and organizations. To those who have been joining us for the whole series of this symposium, welcome back. And to those who missed our previous edition, please check out the Linktree access to the recorded section of Hunters and Gatherers, the conversation between curators and artists of the Hunter exhibition, responded by Zoibat, and Extraction Resilience Amid the Environment in Entropy, a conversation between Prilatania, Elizabeth Inandia, Wuchalanan, Sutirat Paparinya, responded by Agung Hujatnika Jeno. The video recording will also be available in our website of huntersandgatherers.com.
Pollination is an initiative of the Factory Contemporary Arts Center, Ho Chi Minh City in 2018, providing emerging curators and artists in Southeast Asia the opportunity to co-produce and collaborate to mutually benefit from this region private arts infrastructure platform, recognizing the value of sharing, pollinating their critical ideas and activities. Pollination 3 is organized by the Factory Contemporary Arts Center in Ho Chi Minh City, commissioned curators LIR from Yogyakarta and Kittima Chareeprasit from Chiang Mai, invited artists Maryanto from Yogyakarta and Ruangsak Anuwatiwimon from Bangkok to create the project of Hunters and Gatherers. After more than a year in field research beneath Mount Merapi's explosive peak and the Lower Mekong that give border to Thailand and Laos, an exhibition opened at the Mayam Contemporary Art Museum in Chiang Mai, and then toured to My Ili Art Space in Khon Kaen late 2021, with an online symposia from 28 to 30 May and dedicated website with www.huntersandgatherers.com. Aside from that, a number of public programs were made, such as curator conversation hosted by Art Curator Grid, and a video screening and discussion as part of FARBAR program at the Gray Center for Arts and Inquiry, Chicago. The video in this screening can still be available for viewing until this day. Please check it out if you haven't seen it. This whole project came about through the generous sponsor from Some Fund for Arts and Ecology, Indonesia, and Mayam Contemporary Arts Museum in Chiang Mai, Thailand. The making of the website was supported by the Gray Center for Arts and Inquiry from Chicago.
This online symposium, The Gatherer, taking place over 3 days, with an aim to gather the research stories and interdisciplinary perspective behind the Pollinations project of Hunters and Gatherers. It's hosted by Selasar Sunario Art Space, Bandung, where we are right now. exploring relatable scientific findings and ideas of local embodied knowledge, folklores, mythology, bedtime stories, and local method of ecological survival. We realize a need to listen not only one side of the story, but also more than one side of the story. Thus, the symposium gathered brilliant minds living in Indonesia and Thailand, artists, historian, filmmaker, curators, social scientists, and more to share their works and opinion, expanding what it means to hunt for our needs, taking the time to gather differing perspectives in order to better guide a future forward. This third day, titled Extinction, the Impacts of Human on Our Non-Human World, will prod the idea of extinction and how it relates to the way humans live and how it affects non-human existence. Previously, we commissioned essay in this topic to the writer, artist, academic who will be speaking in this particular day. The Forrest Curriculum lecture will focus on the Special Economic Zone, SEZ, in southern Johor, Malaysia, and its forest city, to rethink how environment are imagined as smart and resilient in the era of capitalist greenwashing. One of their questions is what it is like to build a city on the forest, not in, but on. JJ Rizal, who unfortunately will not be here in person with us today, pre-recorded his lecture and will explore the relation between the absence of Betawi's ancestor graveyard culture and current ecological damage in Jakarta. The Betawi are one of the most recent formed ethnic group in Indonesia, which are considered as native ethnicity of Jakarta.
A little north of the graveyard of Betawi's ancestor, Tita Salina visits a sinking island where the grave of as Islamic political leader once was, begging acknowledgement of climate refugees and its relation to the erasure of history. While Napak Serirak will explore deforestation and its related developmental project in Southeast Asia, which threaten wildlife and plant species, not only from the national or regional points of view, but to quote him, rather we must think about the topic in question upon planetary scale, so that there is no thinking about extinction from Southeast Asia or anywhere else, as if it is there, but only from the localities of the planet, where everywhere matters. Thus, to think about extinction from Southeast Asia is to think about extinction from the planet. We will let the last sentence sink in before we start the session. To think about extinction from Southeast Asia is to also think about extinction from the planet.
After all the session is done, our mentor Vipash Purichanont will share his response for today's session. Throughout the session, shall you have any question for the speaker, please feel free to write them down at the Q&A box feature below. We will collect your questions and answer them at the end of the session. So without further ado, we would like to welcome the first speaker, Forrest Curriculum, Abhijan Toto and Pujita Guha. Please, the time is yours.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I guess I'll start speaking about what we were tasked to speak about, which is introduce Forest City and the kind of work we did for the Pollinations project. But before that, I'd just like to thank everyone on the Pollinations project, Zoe, Joyce, Kittima, and everyone else, and Vipash also for all the feedback that you gave us in the work as it progressed and so on. So just to kind of, before I go along, I just wanted to introduce us, which is Forrest Curriculum as well. I guess some of you here might know us, but for those of you who don't, Forrest Curriculum is a sort of, in-disciplined, and we like to stick with the word, in-disciplined research and curatorial platform. And we work especially on the nature cultures of what is called Zomia, which is the forested lands of South and Southeast Asia. So, so without much ado, let me just start screen sharing in a second. Give me 1 second. Oh my God. Okay, so yeah, so before I start talking about it's here now. Yeah. So one of the things that we were pretty much interested to think about with this project was to think about basically something we've not actually done prior to this. And thanks to Joyce, who kind of urged us to think about, which is to think about the relationship between what we said as the nature cultures of South and Southeast Asia, but it's specifically in its relation to built environments, infrastructure, and logistics. And that is something that we were interested in. And also much of the conversation as we have with artists or generally people in and around Southeast Asia, we realize that especially with the burgeoning or the kind of expanding infrastructural presence of China in that region. And we pretty much got interested to think on those lines as well. And Forest City proved an interesting kind of case study for us. One, because obviously it's related to forests, and as both Toto and I kept joking while writing it, it is sort of FC, which is Forest City meets FC, which is Forest Curriculum. And what we were interested to think about is the relationship between how tropical forests were meeting questions of infrastructure, which also was meeting questions of geopolitics of the region. And Forest City, as is very, very clearly demarcated in the map here, sits at the sort of triangle between the Johor states, between the Johor Islands in Malaysia and Singapore. And this became the sort of the selling point for the infrastructure project, precisely as this proximity between both Malaysia and Singapore, and therefore access to trade routes. But most importantly, in the region as well, access to sand and mud, which actually becomes the foundation for extraction and extinction. I'll come to that point in a bit. But I think the geographical proximity and its sort of ability to connect to the entirety of Southeast Asia, but also proximity to China, Australia in sort of a radial fashion in that way. But definitely the second link, which connects Johor to Singapore and Forest City's own proximity here, became like a key selling point for the project. But some of the other things that the project was interested in, and this is where we got really interested, is this idea of vertical landscaping, which is to think about basically how can you entangle concrete with greenery and so on. And this has been a sort of a old tactic or an old strategy that many infrastructure projects right now take into very much into regard, which is to think of basically just put plants here and there, just landscape it with green and greenery and forest, and it becomes a tactic for greenwashing, right? Which becomes a practice for telling us that, hey, look, like all the infrastructure projects that we are selling you are pretty much sustainable and so on. So what we were interested is to find out that, yes, if this is greenwashing in certain ways, what are the other histories of greenery in that regard, right? And we started tracking the different ideas of greenery in this space. I'll also come to it. But what we were interested first and foremost, and this was a starting point, which is to think of how plants literally get embedded in trees and so on, something that's called vertical landscaping in architecture. The other thing that Smart City was very much interested to sell us was this idea of what could be smartness in such a milieu. On one hand, the idea of smartness was definitely this embedding of sensors and digital technology and surveillance, which we see pretty much common with every sort of a smart city project anywhere across the world. But what was really interesting for us here was that they were trying to sell the idea of the smart city based on emissions and things like that. So what the city infrastructure kind of tried to sell to its people and buyers was this sort of a 3-tier infrastructural plan. So at the rock bottom, almost you could say, you have the car parking space and so on. And then over that, you would have highways and things like that. And on top of everything else, you would have the public mode of transport, right? And which would basically give you the idea that the city is emissions free, right? So it's actually habitable and it's anti-extinction and anti-extraction and things like that, right? Whilst kind of hiding what is really happening below the ground. Like you kind of push all the traffic, all the pollution and everything right below the ground and just keep this idea of greenery and so on above the ground. But the other thing that we were really interested to think about, and this is what we kind of wrote pretty extensively in our piece, was to think of where exactly is the forest in the forest city, right? And I mean, obviously, needless to say, that is what Forrest Curriculum would also be interested to think about, right? Now, the major thing that we saw here, and this is going back to the question of sand and so on, one of the things that we saw majorly that was happening in such a project was the idea of sand reclamation, right? And we've kind of worked on this idea of what is it to mean to reclaim lands and things like that. While they were basically reclaiming sand from the nearby Malaysian ports and things like that, they were basically supplanting and replanting supplanting all the sand, supplanting all the seagrass meadows that is basically very much prevalent in this area. So what exactly ended up happening in this region, and this is something, a question of greenery that we were interested in, is that the seagrass has its own color of greenery in some way or the other. And what they did is that while they basically kept flooding in all the sand to make the islands to reclaim the infrastructural project, they basically clamped down and really made extinct, to go back to today's discussion and so on, really made extinct all the ecosystem that was in and around of the forest city, basically. So by putting or kind of redistributing sand from other places and nearby ports and things like that, they basically killed off what is called the seagrass meadows in and around this island, right? And that got the infrastructure project into many sorts of legal issues between the Malaysian government, the Singapore government, and the Chinese government, all kind of going back and forth, redesigning the plan and things like that. And what ended up happening is that slowly after the seagrass meadows got killed away, and the ecosystem that kind of surrounds it with different kinds of fisheries and things like that, it actually, on the other hand, engendered, which is produced a new set of ecosystem where the macro algae became very famous, kind of very prevalent, which kind of produces a different kind of greenery of its own, right? So what we kind of saw with this entire project is that the forest city has its own kind of greenery, which is all this very tropical, very polished looking green leaves and trees that you keep seeing and hanging from all these beautiful buildings and so on. But it hid other stories of greenery, right? And that is what greenwashing actually means in some way or the other, which it kind of hid both the death of the seabeds that it very steadfastly produced, very constantly killed off all the seagrass meadows, and also in turn produced a different kind of greenery, which is that of the macroalgae, which kind of dominates the entire ecosystem and kind of makes extinct everything else in that regard. And needless to say that, of course, this entire change of the ecosystem in and around forest city also changed the political or social ecosystem, precisely because it killed off small subsistence fishing, for one thing. It killed off trading and porting or micro navigation that often islander communities do, moving between islands and things like that. So it killed off a different political and social ecosystem, right? In as much as it killed off a sort of what would be a pure ecological ecosystem in that regard. So so that is what the forest city produced in one set of sort of level. The other thing that we were sort of interested in with forest city, and this is what I mentioned pretty much early on, was to think of basically the geopolitics of all of this that was happening, right? So if on one hand, this geopolitics is sought out at the level of the local communities that were bearing the brunt of this infrastructural project, there were other sort of larger questions of capital moving in between Hong Kong, Malaysia, Cyprus, Singapore, and forest city itself. So I guess maybe I'll hand it over to Abhijan, who will kind of pick it up from here and conclude our presentation. Yeah,
Purichanont, thank you so much for that. I think that for us, we're always very interested in the relationship between sort of questions of ecological collapse and the ways in which they're kind of entangled with sort of both politics at a sort of a micro and a macro level. So one of the ways in which we were kind of approaching this, and why Forest City became such an interesting kind of case study for us, was also in relationship to this being a sort of a testing ground for the ways in which we're going to be seeing the Belt and Road Initiative play out within the context of Southeast Asia. I think we were also very much responding to Ruangsak's project within the context of the Pollination project, where he has been looking at sort of this sort of hinterland area between sort of on the northern borders of Thailand, where one can actually begin to see the ecological impact of, for example, the control of the dams in southern China. By the Chinese government, which kind of created a sort of a situation of micro drought, and sort of changed the microclimate of mainland Southeast Asia, which is sort of one of the kind of impacts of this. I think for us, and this is also why it's important to talk about this within the context of the special economic zone. I mean, these zones that are sort of outside of they produce a kind of a state of exception in that sense. And thinking from the perspective of Zomia, we're always interested in the ways in which states become stated, states sort of reproduce themselves, states become visible, and for whom and at what times, at what points in a process do states become present and absent. Thinking of states as sort of almost kind of seasonal entities that have their own politics of manifestation. See this play out at a number of different levels. And on the one hand, there is the question of what relationships to states does this kind of hyper accelerated project of the Belt and Road have within this region, and what forms of negotiation between sort of colonial and anti-colonial context can one imagine from this? And on the other hand, to really look at the way and look at the bodies that are involved within this. And sort of this is where this kind of comes into it. Because one of sort of this sort of quite almost how does one put it, kind of like a synecdochal relationship that one sees within this is at the two ends of the spectrum are two bodies or sort of two figures that become that have these loose affiliations with states in different ways. On the one hand, there are the bodies of the actual construction workers that are producing and creating Forest City, and this we all know. These are subalternized construction workers, largely from South Asia, but also from poorer Southeast Asian communities, either from Burma, from other parts of Malaysia, Bangladesh, etc., that go into the production of these mega projects in the Southeast Asian context. And on the other hand, there is the body of the owners of Country Garden Holdings, which is the sort of the state affiliated project that sponsored and supports Forest City. And one of the things that I was very interested in is the involvement of the Yang family in the Cyprus passport scandal, which took place over the last sort of like 10 years when the government of Cyprus essentially started selling passports to wealthy individuals or wealthy groups who were able to purchase sort of beachfront properties on the island as a way of sort of boosting attracting attracting business. What ended up happening was that there was a very little vetting of the people that were investing in Cyprus, and therefore you had businessmen from all over, business people from all over the world that were fleeing corruption charges against them in their own home context, particularly from Russia, from China, from Venezuela, from Vietnam. People that were sort of being prosecuted in their own countries that were able to buy EU citizenship essentially, in order to kind of escape these contexts. What we see here on the screen is a document that Al Jazeera found during their during their investigation of this, which is the application that Huing Yang, who is the scion of the country holdings owning family, who is possibly the richest woman in Asia currently, and the application that she made for the passport for herself and for her husband, which is of course quite problematic given that China doesn't really allow holding dual citizenship. And I think for us, this kind of underscores the ways in which states produce different forms of control on different kinds of bodies, and thinking about the relationship between between capital and states within the context of the Belt and Road of capital to kind of ongoing Chinese imperialism within the region. Because of course, if we're looking at Forest City as a case study within the context of sort of state-affiliated Chinese capitalism, it doesn't necessarily seem as outre, because we've seen these kinds of major infrastructure projects on tertiary cities within the Chinese context that kind of create these kinds of greenwashed environments. And one need only think about Xi Jinping's recommitment to becoming carbon neutral by the year 2050 to look at the ways in which greenwashing has become a huge part of the mechanism of Chinese Communist Party propaganda, especially within the last few years. And indeed, it's interesting to look at how, within the context of the current geopolitics of the new Cold War, climate has become this point of contestation between the Chinese government and governments in the West. It's interesting, therefore, to think about how this will, so Forest City, in that sense, becomes this very interesting case study in how we might be able to think about strategies to deal with this. It is interesting to think about what actually took place with Forest City, wherein we had a situation where the Malaysian government, in fact, said that after several years of construction and sort of scandals around this, disallowed Chinese ownership of plots of land in Forest City, which was a huge blow to the project. And instead, the Johor government was forced to look inwards within Malaysia to sell the properties in this development. And so therefore, at that point, about a third of the reclamation projects had been completed, and so the second and third phases actually never went into production because of this. And of course, Country Garden Holdings, which is owned by Yang Huing, of course, always denied that this was the case within of why the project was kind of put on hold in this manner. That is kind of playing out with the ways in which states are trying to kind of negotiate their own relationships with this kind of capital-based colonial process that we're seeing. Pujita?
Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well. I guess we have maxed out on our time, so I guess I'd like to pass it on to Lir, or anyone else would want to take us out from here. But thank you so much for having us on board. Once again, it was great researching on the project itself. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pujita and Toto.
Okay, that's fine. Hi, so is my microphone working now? Yes? Oh, I can't hear anything. Sorry. Okay. So if my microphone is working, then I will share the screen. Okay, guys, lovely people. I am so happy to be here with all of you, and I wish to thank the Pollination Project and, of course, of hunters and gatherers, all of the gatherers today, and especially my friend Kittima, who invited me to contribute an essay on thinking about an extinction from kind of certain point of view. And in this case, I guess I use Southeast Asia as a point of reference, and I try to kind of think beyond that, beyond the region. So I will have like two things to do today. First is the poetry reading on the poem that have been written recently on related to extinction. And after that, I will talk about an essay that is published online on the website already. Yeah, in which Dito has read some of my conclusion at the opening of the session. Okay, let me start by read the poem. I will try to read slowly as you might hear clearly the word that I use. Okay. Circle of Life, a poem. I crawled out of the shell on this beach, on this island, amongst the sea. I swam into the oceans. I traveled around the world in 50 years. Upon my return, I swam ashore to lay our eggs, to bear our children in my birthplace, on our native land, where our offspring of our offspring would lay their eggs, at the same place where our ancestors of our ancestors have laid their eggs. And I would spend another 50 years travel around the world before returning again to our native sea, to our native land, if I would have lived through 100 years, and I would have traveled around the world for many other times if I would have lived through many 100 years. If you wouldn't have dispossessed us from our home seas, our homelands, massacred and swallowed our flesh and blood, our genealogies would have survived through millions of years. Circle of Life, a poem. I did read the poem because something that I think about, one thing is when I find my forgotten book, and the other reason is I got inspired by a program from Channel News Asia, in which there's a kind of program on history of Southeast Asia by the historian Forrest Curriculum and the artist Ilan from Sabah, Malaysia, and in their conversation that they talk about the myth from Sabah, from the native of Sabah, and they talked about an animal that traveled around the world, and that got inspired me to write this poem, to think about the region and the place and beyond the place. So I will try to kind of talk about the book a little bit. This is the book called สัตว์ป่าเมืองไทย or wildlife in of Thailand. The book is it is undated, but I think it was published in the 1990s and featuring wildlife in Thailand, and some connotation of this is to stress about extinction. And from this book, I think I invite people, you or everyone who read the essay, to imagine an animal, especially endangered animal from Southeast Asia. I try to list some species of animals, and if you do you think that which one comes to your mind or not? Like an elephant, tapir, dugong, sun bear, orangutan, rhinoceros, tiger, gaur, pangolin, a whale shark, macaque, gibbon, hornbill, pelican, pheasant, giant catfish, a sea turtle. Then what? I think why I asked this, because I'm sorry, I lost a little bit. I think the animals let us think about place. I mean, like endemic animal let us think about place, as in this case is human. But why we have to think about animal with place or region? I try to shift from the species of animals to other things, to the region. The region of Southeast Asia itself is kind of appear with a various name. As we can see, like Suvarnabhumi, Golden Peninsula, further India, East Indies, Malay Archipelago, Indochina, Nanyang, South Seas, or etc. During the colonial period, parts of the region were partitioned as fragmented into like the Strait settlements, British Burma, French Indochina, or Dutch East Indies. And I think this is the period when not only we came to think about the regional classification or categorization, but it came along with modern knowledge in which like we have come to think about animal species and plant species within the region by the incoming of the natural history knowledge. And hence I suggest that to speak of extinction in this way is to speak of biodiversity. This point I got from the literary scholar Mary Louise Pratt, who talked about kind of global classificatory project. And what interests me a lot is how places, plants, animals, and peoples have been discovered and classified. And that comes to the thing that I want to discuss is on the elephant. Why is there an elephant statue, the Siamese elephant statue, happen to have in Indonesia as well as in Singapore? I think this is the period when nation or states or place have been categorized in which relate to kinds of animals. And in this case, Thailand, or back then Siam, was kind of merge itself or make an image of itself through this kind of animal, is elephant. And and this let me try to like push this point a bit to the present when there is kind of repatriation of orangutans from Thailand back to Indonesia. And back in this case, I mean, because some orangutans have been kind of abducted or kidnapped or like captured and bring to Thailand to do some kind of entertainments and for this topic for these events, I think it is not only happens or become an event on the kind of animal welfare ground, but in this case it relates to kind of international problems or international conflict and national and international interest. So this is filled with politics and economic and so wildlife issue, animal welfare, environmental problems, and many things. So in this case, I suggest that the forces of politics and economics not only affect human, but in this case affect to the animals and kind of their surroundings. And this kind of lead me to ask about the focus of the region from nation, from the specific nation to region, and from region to think beyond the region. In this, I suggest two kinds of scale of thinking from space and time, space or place and time. In this case, I try to push the point from how to think about species extinctions from the point of view of nation or region, but when we talk about extinction, it is not only the national problems or regional problems, but it's a kind of the problem that shared along with other places, other region, and that leads me to like kind of tease or push it to the planetary scale, and so also the time scale to think back before or beyond the colonial period to think about like larger or longer time scale. And so yeah, I think maybe I must end at this point, yeah, before Vipash my comments later. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Napak. Now we can give the time to Mbak Tita. Mbak Tita,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, before I share my screen, I would like to thank Pollination's projects, LIR, Mira, and Dito for the hard works, and Kittima and Mayam for inviting me and having me in this online symposia. Please allow me to tell you a story about a newborn archipelago, which I just created recently. Nusa Sengsara. Sengsara, it means suffering in English. 3 days ago, I went to a settlement in the border between Jakarta and Tangerang district. one site I've been visiting since 2018. At that time, there was the highest tide recorded in this year. The peak reached 1 meter high. The water came into Kampung at night. I personally felt suffer to see the situations, how problems overlap, to see how the stream changed dramatically due to the man-made structure. People live there have to make a lot of adjustments. I'm sure in every house we have brooms to clean our floors. But here, people have pump to pump out water from their sinking houses. There is suffering stay there for a very long time, although residents seem to ignore it and live on. Along the way there, I saw posters of fundraising for Palestine from various mass organizations that depict the suffering, which is strategic for sure to be used to sell the humanitarian issues by showing off the pettiness that sadly it is never used to advocate the fundamental issues to solve humanity issue in the long term. In any major religion, suffering is one of the most fundamental aspects, which each of them promoted with their own versions, although these have relations one after the other. Suffering is the most real thing in life. If you want to understand the reality, because reality is painful. The phenomena of panic buying in pandemic time, the increasing of conspiracy theory followers who deny the climate change are some proofs that we become cowards and run from the reality, individually or collectively. Nusa, or island. Although it needs to get further research, but in my own personal assumptions and experience, the cognitive ability of human to imagine something that has something to do with the suffering curse of humankind, that we cannot remove it. And we have to face the hidden battle in our own island of mind. Perhaps by imagining something, at least we can forget about suffering for a moment. The easiest way to find this argument is as a person living in the largest archipelago in the world. This has a very close relations with forms, stories, mythologies, or on the countless islands where they're inhabited or not. I'm going to share my experience for the last 3 years in my attempt to encounter the archipelago. I encountered submerged islands, the islands facing the threat of the rising of sea level, islands for refugees, islands from plastic waste, dangerous islands to jail terrorists and extremists, and also the newborn man-made islands. So many questions in my head. I'm looking for the answers. Were these land and islands previously alive? Were they suffering? If we see the algorithm bias in representing islands is totally opposite. Island is paradise. When I type #island, this is what appears. Sandy beaches, coconut trees, blue water, just like Moy indie paintings. This then triggers me to collect memories from my visits to few islands, physically or via satellite, that make me suffer because of the reality they are facing, which I think they are also suffering. This is Ubi Besar Island in the Thousand Island north of Jakarta that was once inhabited. But then it became increasingly unsafe to live on due to the sand mining for artificial beaches for the Soekarno-Hatta International Airport, which later the island was completely disappeared around the 80s. Now it sits 4 meters below water. And what you can see are that white corals and not the slightest remains or ruins of any human civilizations can be seen. Before the island totally sank, Ubi Besar Island had one more sad story. In 1962, It was empty and arid, and there was only a single crackle tree, under which was the tomb of a freedom fighter named Kartosuwiryo, who led the Darul Islam or Indonesian Islamic Army Rebellion from 1949 to 1962. He was then captured and sentenced to death. The execution was carried out on Ubi Island. He was buried there as well. When I went there to follow the coordinates last year in 2020, the beacon tower had also disappeared. It's rusted. It must have collapsed. And other disappearing islands also have similar fate, like Pulau Nirwana or Nyamuk Besar. In English, means Nirwana means paradise. Nyamuk is mosquito, so big mosquito. Perhaps at that time there are many mosquitoes, deadly mosquitoes living there. Some fishermen said it disappeared since 10 years ago, or some other even said that since 30 years ago. My imaginations process the seabed. The look of the seabed into a suffering face. This is the beacon tower of Nusi Island, the other submerged island. For me, seeing this tower as if I seeing a tombstone. Talak Island. Some part of the land are still above the water. Some ruins can be seen. Sometimes fishermen come there, tied up their boats and catch fish. If the sea level keeps rising, it will be gone soon. Pulau Dapur, or Kitchen Island. According to fishermen, 5 years ago, they still could see a tiny sand dunes on top of that. And turtle laid their eggs there. But now it's totally gone. Pulau Bidadari, or Angel Island. But it has a very total different stories in the 17th century. This island is also known as Pulau Sakit, or Island of Sickness. It functions as a leper colony, where they were kept isolated from the rest of the population to prevent others from being infected with leprosy. Now it becomes a private resort where people, especially local fishermen, are not allowed to come. G Island, an abandoned artificial island that decays. Hundreds millions cubic meter of sand from the other part of the country were mined to construct it. Sand is the second most consumed natural resource after water due to the booming of global building, artificial islands, constructions, and the concrete or cement industry. Around 24 islands in Indonesia have disappeared since 2005 due to regional and neighbor countries for their artificial expansions on the sea. Among them are 5 islands located in Thousand Islands, which I mentioned before, this in the northern part of Jakarta, and for sure there will be more. 1001st Island. I made my own artificial islands out of trash that scattered on the Jakarta Bay. With the help from local fishermen in Kali Adem, Muara Angke, north of Jakarta, we towed the islands to the Thousand Island Archipelago complex and floated there. Buru Island. During the New Order time, this island was the site of a prison used to hold thousands of political prisoners, artists, writers that considered representing leftists. That is include Pramudia Anantatur, a notable writer. Most prisons were closed in the 1980s. There were more than 12,000 people had served a prison sentence there. This is a drawing from Madani Untung. He was stayed there once. Lucy Island. Lucy Island was born from the mud flow that has not stopped since 2006. The name Lucy coming from Lu from lumpur, which is mud, and sea coming from Sidoarjo, which is where these districts are attacked by this mud flow. Man-made disasters had eliminated dozens of villages, displaced hundreds of thousands of people, destroyed thousands of hectares of productive land for rice and sugarcane, and killed thousands of livestock. The memory of the hometown is lost, not only in the sense that the names of the villages are lost in the state records, but these memories have been replaced by the narrative of a new island in the form of green mangrove forests. Galang Island. Galang is located just south of Batam Island, near Singapore. In 1979 to 1996, this island became Vietnamese refugee camp. Many Vietnamese boat people and asylum seekers were temporarily accommodated there during the determinations of their refugee status and resettlement in US, Australia, and some European countries. Since last year, when COVID-19 arrived in Indonesia, the island becomes the designated COVID-19 emergency hospital that prioritizing for migrants who returns home. Bangka and Belitung Islands in the eastern part of Sumatra. Bangka, coming from the Sanskrit word Fangka, means tin. These islands was rich with tin. It had been explored since the 7th century until today. Tin has been used since the early alphabet until the era of coding technology. Today, after the price of tin is declining, the miners come for sand for the constructions of recreation site in an expensive housing which is built on a reclaimed land, just west side of Jakarta. Sebangka Islands in Riau Archipelago, it's near Malacca Straits. The extractions of sand in small islands are massive and out of control. It is worsened by the new policy that is also corrupted. Nusa Kambangan Island. The island was designated as a prison island during the Dutch rule. The colonial government built prisons for criminals. It is used as a prison island continued after independence. During the New Order regime, hundreds of political prisoners were imprisoned on the island, and now terrorists or person who is considered radical are imprisoned there. Also corruptors with serious cases, but only that they have a five-star prison facilities. What to do with those islands? In the middle of the toxicated and polarized society, there are no actions whatsoever from the government or religions or any formal institutions. Do I have to tell this story to the turtles? Because we don't mourn those islands. In Iceland, this is a dead glacier named Auk Glacier, means okay. In 2018, because of the excessive summer heat that melted and killed the ice, the city mayor, together with the scientists and the local people, held a funeral ceremony and made a memorial plaque because the glacier went dead. A glaciologist said that things that grow and move are considered animate, even if we resist the idea that every animate thing has a soul. A healthy glacier grows each winter more than it melts each summer. When a glacier melts, its memory disappears. Nothing we could do. A good friend has left us. On another sample, an iceberg that was detached from Antarctica just recently, a few days ago, and recorded to be the largest iceberg that now floats in the oceans, has been named A76 and documented on the satellite. After long discussions and arguments with the turtles, it curates my idea. And finally, we agree to make a sanctuary for those deserted islands. It is located not far from where I live, on the Java Sea, where it's loaded with overlapping problems, tug of war between ecological and territorial issues. During pandemic time, I have adopted 4 cats, and oops, I would like to stop share screen for a moment. Mana dia? Sorry. I lost the cursor. Oh yeah. This is my 4 cats. And also I adopted 2 archaic anthropod sea creature. It's alive. This species exists on Earth since 450 million years ago. And actually, to have these guys in my house makes my life less suffering. Oh yeah, and the anthropod, I will release the horseshoe within next week. So for sure they're not gonna die here. I'm gonna share screen again for the last slides. And now I don't feel enough, so I'm going to add more. A new archipelago for those suffering islands. I call it Nusa Sengsara, or the Suffering Archipelago. What I said before, I will locate it not far from my house in the Java Sea. And its composition is influenced by the political identity, tribalism, mythology, and the hegemony of geopolitical power in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Tita Salina, for the interesting presentation. And we are sorry again for the technical problem that we had earlier. And now we are moving to, before we are moving to Vipash to respond, we will screen again a video from JJ Rizal. And yeah, thank you, Christine. Please.
Saya akan mulai dengan surat pembaca yang dimuat di Kompas dari Puji Lestari dengan judul Pemakaman di Pekarangan. Puji memprotes tetangganya yang seorang Betawi memakamkan anggota keluarganya di pekarangan rumah yang bersebelahan dengan dia. Surat Puji Lestari ini ditanggapi oleh Imam Firdaus dari Bandung yang mengungkapkan pengalaman yang sama bahwa dia beberapa kali tinggal di Jakarta di rumah orang Betawi yang di dalamnya pekarangannya menjadi pemakaman juga. Ini bukan hanya penggambaran sebuah krisis daya dukung lingkungan, melainkan juga persoalan kerentanan kemanusiaan berupa konflik sosial, konflik tanah, dan akhirnya kesenjangan ekonomi yang termanifestasi dalam bentuk tumbuhnya ormas-ormas produsen kekerasan berbasis etnis lokal. Pakar kebudayaan dan sosial kota, Ibu Melanie Budianta, menyebut dalam sebuah pidatonya di Dewan Kesenian Jakarta bahwa asal-usul dari bencana ekologis dan krisis sosial di Jakarta dapat dicari pada rasa malu para pejabat atas atau golongan massa di Jakarta yang merupakan ibu kota Indonesia, bahwa ibu kota ini pernah disebut sebagai the big village atau kampung besar. Keberatan bahwa Jakarta disebut sebagai the big village sebenarnya bukan hanya keberatan yang muncul pada masa Orde Baru, tapi juga muncul pada masa sebelum Orde Baru. Soekarno dengan bahasa yang berbeda sebenarnya menolak sebutan Jakarta sebagai the big village. Dia mengatakan Jakarta harus dibentuk dengan fisikal warda atau wajah muka yang baik begitu ya. Dan itu diterjemahkan artinya Jakarta harus tumbuh menjadi kota dengan model internasional. Nah, tapi dalam pemerintahannya yang pendek, Soekarno belum cukup mampu mewujudkan bagaimana menolak stereotip tentang the big village itu. Momentum terbesarnya justru muncul pada kado terbaik yang diberikan oleh Soekarno kepada masyarakat Jakarta di masa akhir kepemimpinannya, yaitu pengangkatan Ali Sadikin pada tahun 1966. Ali Sadikin inilah yang kemudian secara dramatis itu melakukan transisi politik yang cepat, tetapi memungkinkan kembalinya seluruh apa yang pernah ditolak oleh Soekarno, yang dengan lantang berkata bahwa go to hell with your age, artinya menolak seluruh modal asing. Tapi di masa Orde Baru justru pintu dibuka seluas-luasnya melalui kota Jakarta. Pada masa transisi dari Soekarno ke Soeharto, Jakarta mengalami ketegangan yang luar biasa. Memang Jakarta tidak mengalami apa yang terjadi yang kemudian Sohor disebut sebagai pembunuhan massal pada tahun 1965. Keberadaan kedutaan-kedutaan besar, perwakilan-perwakilan negara asing, serta perwakilan-perwakilan modal internasional membuat Jakarta diorientasikan untuk sedemikian rupa meredam konflik yang berujung pada pembunuhan massal. Tapi di Jakarta itu terjadi perampasan properti luar biasa. Nah, ketika Ali Sadikin naik dalam situasi yang sangat dramatis tersebut, persoalan terbesar Ali Sadikin bukan hanya pada konflik politik yang melibatkan orang yang hidup, tapi bagaimana dia menunaikan tugasnya sebagai gubernur untuk memperbaiki Jakarta, terutama yang terbesar justru datang dari persoalan orang mati. Jakarta dalam tata ruang itu centang perenang tempat pemakaman. Tempat-tempat pemakaman bisa ditemukan dalam jarak yang sangat berdekatan, dan ruang yang paling inti, yang paling kuat itu adalah ruang pemakaman. Orang mati bagi orang Betawi itu tidak pergi begitu saja. Mereka tinggal di dalam ruang di mana mereka hidup dan menjadi bagian dari penjagaan tradisi yang luas. Misalnya kita bisa katakan, mengapa mayoritas nama-nama tempat di Jakarta identik dengan nama pohon? Berapa banyak nama tempat yang identik dengan kebun, berapa banyak nama tempat bahkan identik dengan hutan. Karena rupanya dari tradisi pemakaman orang Betawi ini kita bisa merasakan bahwa penghormatan terhadap alam, terhadap ruang hijau, itu bagian yang sangat esensial dalam kehidupan orang Betawi. Tempat-tempat pemakaman bisa ditemukan dalam jarak yang sangat berdekatan dan dalam ruang-ruang yang cukup besar, dan ini membuat wajah muka Jakarta menjadi seperti bukan hanya kampung besar tapi juga sebuah pekuburan atau pemakaman besar, sebab hampir di tiap rumah-rumah orang Betawi mereka memiliki tanah-tanah yang luas dan di dalamnya terdapat pemakaman-pemakaman yang sudah berumur sangat tua. Ali Sadikin memasukkan upaya mengubah wajah Jakarta terutama terkait dengan tempat pemakaman yang berserakan, yang tidak teratur di dalam konsep Master Plan Pembangunan Jakarta 1965-1985. Dalam Master Plan inilah Bang Ali memulai sebuah upaya memindahkan tempat-tempat pemakaman dari rumah-rumah dan ruang-ruang pribadi orang Betawi ke TPU, tempat pemakaman umum. Dia menyediakan pengangkutan berupa ambulan, juga fasilitas-fasilitas lainnya untuk sedemikian rupa agar pemakaman yang ada di rumah-rumah orang Betawi itu bisa berpindah ke tempat-tempat pemakaman umum yang sudah disediakan dan dibuka di seluruh Jakarta. Dan proyek ini bisa kita lihat menjadi proyek yang sangat penting dan proyek yang justru memiliki daya dukung kekuatan politik yang hebat karena dia ada di dalam master plan atau rencana pembangunan Jakarta 1965-85. Bersama masuknya pengaturan pemakaman dari ruang-ruang pribadi orang Betawi ke dalam tempat-tempat pemakaman umum, sebenarnya kita melihat tindakan Ali Sadikin ini merupakan sebuah tindakan yang bisa kita sebut sebuah pendekatan gentrifikasi untuk mengubah wajah kumuh Jakarta, wajah kampung besar Jakarta menjadi kawasan yang bisa dikatakan lebih elit, kawasan yang lebih bersifat kota yang modern. Sebab itu dengan cepat kota merangsek kampung-kampung Betawi dan mentransformasinya menjadi sebuah kawasan pemukiman baru yang modern. Dalam waktu sekejap saja kampung-kampung segera dikepung oleh infrastruktur modern dan fasilitas-fasilitas penanda perkotaan seperti jalan beraspal, bioskop, supermarket, bank, restoran, hingga sekolah-sekolah swasta. Kita bisa melihat dalam restrukturisasi ruang kota tersebut, orang Betawi sebenarnya memasuki sebuah jebakan. Bahwa apa yang mereka miliki dan telah menjadi tradisi, yaitu pekuburan-pekuburan di halaman, dengan dikeluarkannya aturan oleh pemerintah DKI Jakarta, Ali Sadikin, itu sebenarnya telah menjebol satu sistem yang bisa membuat orang Betawi bertahan dengan tanah yang mereka miliki. Artinya otomatis sebenarnya Bang Ali dengan pemerintah DKI Jakarta dengan orientasi untuk mengubah wajah kampung menjadi sebuah kota yang modern, sebenarnya tengah melakukan proses yang disebut sebagai inklusi atau pengambil alihan dengan cara legal maupun dengan cara ilegal. Bahkan bersifat saintifik karena dikatakan bahwa rumah-rumah yang terdapat pemakaman itu berbahaya bagi penghuninya karena mengambil sumber air minum dari tanah-tanah yang otomatis sebenarnya tercemar oleh bahaya pengapuran dari pekuburan-pekuburan yang ditanam di sekitar pekarangan rumahnya. Bersama dengan penetapan master plan dan tempat-tempat pemakaman umum, sebenarnya secara tidak langsung sudah terjadi pengaturan ruang yang sifatnya tradisi dan berakar kuat pada sejarah yang panjang diubah oleh sebuah kepentingan modernitas mengubah wajah kota. Ruang-ruang ditentukan, mana ruang konservasi, mana ruang kapital atau ruang modal, semua ada peruntukan ruangnya. Tata ruang lebih berkembang sebagai tata uang kemudian. Stigmatisasi juga menjadi alat untuk eksklusi. Orang Betawi dikatakan sebagai orang yang terbelakang. Kita sering mendengar dalam sinetron Sidul dicap sebagai orang yang primitif, orang yang tidak berpendidikan. Dan stigma-stigma seperti ini membuat orang Betawi sedemikian rupa berpikir bahwa mereka harus ikut dalam arus modernisasi. Mereka harus ikut dan merelakan ruang-ruang mereka diambil alih dan diatur dalam peruntukan ruangnya. Karena mereka merasa cara untuk menjadi modern adalah mengikuti bagaimana master plan dan desain sebuah kota dilaksanakan oleh pemerintah kota Jakarta. Orang Betawi mulai kehilangan aset-aset mereka yang besar dan terpenting dan merupakan ruang di mana tumbuhnya kebudayaan Betawi. Dan ini akarnya ada pada bagaimana mereka menempatkan leluhur itu dianggap tinggal di dalam ruang yang ditandai dengan pohon-pohon produktif. Bulan dan perubahan musim itu ditandai dengan pohon-pohon berbuah. Misalnya musim duren, musim rambutan, musim mangga. Jadi musim-musim pohon berbuah itu justru menjadi penanda hidup mereka. Dan ini sebenarnya berkait erat dengan ruang-ruang di mana dianggap leluhur-leluhur itu hidup, yaitu di ruang-ruang hijau. Jadi makam-makam di pekarangan rumah orang Betawi itu sebenarnya sejenis mesin pengingat bahwa mereka harus mempertahankan serentang kenangan yang disambung dengan tindakan agar kampung dan penghuninya terus dekat dengan alam. Sehingga siapapun dan dari manapun mereka datang menjadi urban di kota Jakarta, mereka harus menjadi bagian dari kampung dan dapat menemukan cara hidup bersama serta membayangkan cara-cara mengada hari ini, esok, dan ke depan dengan saling merasakan empati sekaligus bagaimana bertindak dalam kebersamaan, terutama dalam menjaga lingkungan agar ekologi tetap mendapat keseimbangan. Ternyata transformasi yang dibanggakan itu tidak memecahkan masalah tentang keberlanjutan lingkungan, misalnya begitu ya, ketahanan sosial budaya. Kota Jakarta mengalami persoalan ekologi yang sangat dramatis. Dalam master plan 6585 itu 37,2% untuk peruntukan ruang hijau, belum termasuk ruang biru, tapi kemudian turun menjadi 30%. Sampai hari ini kita tidak sanggup untuk memenuhi 10% tuntutan dari master plan pembangunan kota Jakarta. Menurut saya menjadi proyek yang sangat penting mengubah mindset atau pikiran kita agar lebih berorientasi pada tantangan di abad 21 yang justru tantangan itu hidup dalam local knowledge atau pengetahuan lokal di kampung-kampung yang bisa menjawab tentang bagaimana menyeimbangkan kehidupan kota dengan ekologi, bagaimana menciptakan sebuah metropolis yang tidak menjadi misropolis atau kota yang penuh masalah, terutama konflik sosial, konflik pertanahan, kota yang berkembang menjadi kota yang intoleran. Akhirnya saya mau mengatakan, mungkin orang-orang di kampung tidak tahu apa artinya semua tindakan mereka ketika mereka harus menguburkan sanak keluarga mereka di halaman rumah. Mereka hanya menjalankan tradisi, tetapi dalam tataran global, sekali lagi, ketika sebagian besar dunia sudah sepenuhnya merengkuh kapitalisme global, makam-makam di pekarangan itu adalah satu aspek kehidupan khas kampung di Jakarta yang menyimpan pengetahuan lokal yang bisa justru menjadi penunjuk kita bagaimana membentuk kota ke depan dengan tidak ada pilihan, harus dibentuk sebagai kota yang hijau untuk belajar merengkuh semangat kampung dan menjadikan roh kota, terutama roh kota tentang pelajaran memberi ruang hijau, ruang bagi pohon yang lebih besar. Terima kasih.
Jarah. Iya, jarah kemana nih? Jarah, Pak. Mana Pak Toki ya?
Abang masih inget nggak Pak Toki sebelah mana?
Ingat sih, ingat. Gue ingat bener dulu ada pohon rukem di sini nih. Nah, itu empang nih gue bener. Gue ingat empang nih dulu si Mamat waktu ngubur kecebur di situ tuh.
Ah, siapa yang nyabut? Mesane sih. Satu orang.
Ya, gua tahu. Lu keluar di sini, Ton. Ya. Bapak mau ini apa perasaan dari sini berapa langkah gitu?
Ya. Coba deh.
Ya. Wah, ini dia nih. Siapa yang tanamin bendera? Oi! Bawa! Dol!
Oi!
Di sini nih! Nih, kuburan kau lo nih! Hei! Petan!
Ayo, udah. Jangan pakai sendal apa udah?
Cepat! Tan, ini dia nih kuburan kau lo. Sini! Aduh, nih! Lah, cuman saya kenapa bolong kuburannya ya?
Kok ini ada giniannya?
Sini. Be, ayah dateng be. Ame mertue, sama anak bini.
Bang, kok saya kagak disebut?
Mandra juga ikut be.
Ngapain tuh orang?
Kok pada duduk di sana? Jadi bukan?
Bukan, masa pada pakai sarung?
Be, pokoknya ayah sekarang udah ngelaksanain ayah punya kaul be. Sekarang si Dul udah jadi tukang insinyur. Si Atun udah jadi tukang rias pengantin.
Dia bohong Atun udah daftar.
Ntar babe denger lu diem. Ntar gua daftarin.
Kong, saya juga pengen jadi supir ya. Gimana nih, Bek?
Udah deh pukul aja.
Mudah-mudahan kita pada sehat ya.
Amin.
Selamat.
Apaan itu?
Apa ya?
Buat Atun aja, Be.
Ish, jangan.
Gua saya.
Gua periksa dulu ntar di rumah.
Jangan lu.
Udah, ntar di rumah kita periksa. Udah sore nih, Dul.
Ayo,
pulang ya.
Ayo. Kita nggak jalan dulu.
Thank you for watching the video.
And thank you, Zoe, for playing the video.
Yeah, because the technical problem here. And to give a short context of the vignette, the last one, it's a film, Sidul Anak Betawi, Sidul, the kids from Betawi, which their family tried to find their ancestor graveyard, but unfortunately the graveyard is already took over by the development of the golf yard. And then it is how the film tried to depict the situation on how this family, this traditional family of Betawi, trying to find the graveyard. Yeah, and then they did a little bit ceremonial thing just to communicate with their ancestor. But turns out right
on the graveyard
is the whole of the core. Yeah.
We will give the time to Vipash to give comments. Shall anyone have question? Please put it in the Q&A box below. Now the time is yours, Vipash.
Okay, thank you, Mira and Tito. I'll try to take it slow but short as well, so we have time to talk and discuss. So first and foremost, thank you all the panelists, Forrest Curriculum, Napak Tita Salina and also JJ Rizal, that hasn't been with us as well. I think there's a lot to take in and I'm trying to be articulate. But before we go into that, I want to congratulate the curators. So of course, LIR and also Kittima for this project, and also all the contributors for the Hunter and the Gatherers. It's been quite a long time that we are together, actually. So I want to unpack a little bit about this project and then why it's forming into this form, and also that would bring some discussions that we had from yesterday into the table as well. So we can somehow make this panels as a conclusions for our production of knowledge that we all doing it together. Pollination is quite special actually, because it's quite an attempt for from the Southeast Asia itself to kind of neutralize the new curator. And then I think what very interesting about pollinations, in my view, is that it was initiated by private museums in the regions, and it's somehow giving a structure at something that quite different than other curatorial program that we experienced it so far. Mostly, I think because it doesn't have that kind of structure that first of all kind of related to the academia. So you have something that more creative, more challenging, more looking forward, and then also it's kind of a little bit less bounded by state power, nation state power, especially because it's being done privately. So that's the two things that make this program quite extraordinary. With that, I think it's providing time and resources for the curator to conduct the research, but also to become the research. So we see Tito, Mira, and then Kittima going around with artists, also spending time together with us, as a mentor, but also the advisor. But then also taking their times to also talk and develop this together with the contributors that we have in the project, so everyone. I think pandemic also just add another layer to the challenge. We have the pandemic, so of course we cannot travel, they cannot travel, the curator cannot travel that much. We can travel domestically, and then I think for all the contributor, the curator also discuss possibly in person, as we can only travel within our own boundaries. So with the challenge of the pandemic, it kind of encourages us to think hardly on the exhibition making. There was a process in which we been together. I remember with Agung, Russia and Zoe as well, and discuss whether we're going to have an exhibition or not. But at the end, we have the exhibition at Mayam with Ruangsak and Maryanto. But at the same time, it's also extend the activity from exhibition making to the other extensions such as website that we contribute together, and then of course the symposium that we had today. The conversation yesterday, I want to follow up, but then also to bring some context from the symposium yesterday into the table, because I think it's very important. And then this might be something that we can take and then having a discussions after my contribution here. So yesterday we had Vucharan and Som Suchirat talk about the creating of the dams. That's also the dam in Mekong River, but also river in Thailand. And I think that's brings some question in terms of the infrastructures that we also have today. That's the first thing. I think it's really interesting when Wood said that, when we are creating the dam, we move one mountain to another mountain. So we create the mountains, man-made mountain, in a place where it shouldn't be a mountain. But then we also destroy the mountain where it was a mountain as well. So that's kind of something that the humans do. The other thing is also the highlight on local knowledge, where Pila Tanya talks about permaculture. But then also I want to bring everyone's attention to this discussion because Akung and also Elizabeth, the in Angdek, also talk about the distinction between human and nature. That's not something that it's a very different kind of proposition as we are talking today, as our discussion today was more like human, non-human. Nonetheless, what struck me is that Elizabeth brought the terms for nature in Bahasa, which is Arams, and then she noted that it's not only nature, but it's also universe, right? And then somehow this word relates to experience and aesthetics. When she mentioned that, I was thinking, yes, we also have a similar word, and it's called Thammashat. Thammashat is like, it's a Bali Sanskrit for Dhamma and then Chata. It means being, something as it is. And Napak can correct me if I'm wrong. But basically this idea that when we talk about Thammashat, it also have some kind of Buddhistic connotation toward it. So it's something that continues to change. Thammashat is something that's continued to change. So nature is somehow something that continues to change, whether human interact with it or not. Or even human, we have our own Thammashat, this kind of essence that continue to change. So that's kind of two things that I think when we brought them in, we have a very different notion of nature, right? And then I think with two notion, we can start to thinking about nature, not as something out there, but something within, something that we experience, something that continue to change. And then I think with that, we somehow see the threats between all these panelists that we have today. Because what we are talking about is not only what we have been presenting and talking about was not nature as something out there, but nature as something that's so close to us. So nature as something, I even think it's more environmentals or ecologicals. So it's something that's surrounding us. You know, we can talk about nature in Bangkok, in Jakarta, in Saigon, in the same way that we can talk about it in Chiang Mai, Sulawesi, or Sayaburi. So the notion of nature also continue to change as well. With this notion, and then with these panels we have on extinctions, the impact of human on our non-human worlds. I think I have 3 points to share after all the presentations. So we'll share to put it on the table again, and then maybe some questions to ask, which you can answer, and then you don't need to answer. Right. First thing I found very interesting in the presentations, both with JJ Rizal and Forrest Curriculum, especially on the notion of gardening. JJ Rizal's story from the grave in the yards. I think the graveyards is something that takes roots. So graveyards make people in Jakarta bound to the land. This is to dwell, and then with the graveyard comes the spirits in the garden, and of course it's come with the notion of returning to the ancestral, and then also maintaining that garden, so abundance. With the graveyards come the garden that's being maintained from generations to generations. With JJ Rizal's work, we see urbanization that happened within 50 years that somehow eliminate that notion of not only the yard, the graveyard, but also the garden and the notion of gardening. With the graveyards come the notion, trust come the notion of season, which I really like. When JJ Rizal talk about mango season, durian season, of course we also have the durian season and mango seasons. And then I remember that my grandma, mango is the best. So we also maintain that notion of gardening and then coming to the parents' home. That seemed to lose, but maybe the questions about the mango season seem to be something that disappear, especially with the project like Forest City, where the logic of times doesn't, belong to the graveyard, but belongs to capitalism. So I'm wondering, like, from what we take from the graveyards, and then we put it into, the Forest City, we can maybe scaling it up, as Napak said, and then see Forest City as some question of biodiversity. Because we know as long as we maintain the gardens, we also know that my mango is different than yours mango. So we have different mangoes that taste differently. That's biodiversity in a nutshell, very small. But then with the forest city, are we making artificial forests without spirits? That's the questions. Are we making forests without roots? Garden without roots? Or is it a garden of capitalist design with artificial biodiversity? So we kind of, with those kind of projects, we bring different kind of fruits and plants, making different kind of gardens, but then there's also artificials as well. So that's his first one. The second one is about imaginations beyond species. So I think this, I kind of connected Tita Salina with Napak. I think you are doing very similar thing, but approaching it with very different approach. So maybe I'll talk about Napak first. I think with Napak, I recommend that you also read the writing as well, because it starts from the SEA Games in Chiang Mai, and then it's with the mascot of the SEA Games being I think it's a Siamese cat with umbrellas, and then it's kind of remind us that people tend to anthropomorphizing the world, so we make everything into human in a way. But then with presentation of Napak today, we found that he's doing another way around. So we are imagining us being something else. And then it's kind of opened up to a very different perspective. We cannot think only about our homeland, but we think about, our, you say, home ocean or home sea, but also home skies. And the world doesn't feel the same anymore. The same focus also expand to space and time. So with the understanding and the imagination that we have for non-human, we would be able to expand that notions. We can think about life in 1 day periods, or we can think about life that will, stay for 500 years, for example, or life that roams the oceans. But with Napak, I think that's where Tita Salina works come in, because not only we can imagine to be other species, we can imagine beyond species as well. So what Tita Salina does was that to challenge that notion, and then imagines of being non-human, archipelagos, and then being in the other forms. So I think that's also something that come out in the presentations. So I guess my question is, how can we use this as a kind of strategics for artistic practice? How can we do that? How it is going to be a possibility in which we can, looking at it and then making this into a way to challenge our own notion of trying to make everything human, which I think Tita Salina already answered that a little bit in the in her presentations. Last one is something I'm interested in, so I just want to also think about it here as well. I think I'm interested in, with this project as well, to think about the human desire and the relationship between human desire and extinctions. With the greenwashing, is not something that particularly particular to Southeast Asia, to Malaysia, or even to Forest City. I think it's something bigger than that. We have been discussing in the global world about reuse clean energies and going to the moon at the same time. So at the same time that we want to save the planet, we also want to get away from it. Sadly, Southeast Asia, not sure if that sadly is a word for this, but then Southeast Asia is not be taking part in going somewhere else, escaping. I think most of the people who want to escape is from the West, no? And then also, of course, China is trying to escape right now. What Southeast Asia is trying to do is another way around. I think what we are doing is fortifications. So we make high-rise building. As Forrest Curriculums talk about vertical landscaping. So we make, high-rise building fortifications. The other thing that we do, and then we're doing, I think one of the best is reclamations. So we build more lands, extended land. We imagine new islands. We creating new islands by destroying surrounding of that islands as well. So that's something that we do. So I'm pretty sure that what we discussed today, especially on the forest and then the islands, would be something that we see in the future, especially for Southeast Asia. Building more high-rise or claiming more lands, and then creating more surrounding, the polluted surrounding. So whether it's kampong or the sand and oceans surrounding it. So another thing that I think we'll leave it here is also, it might be a good time to start discussing about the future after we see all these projects coming together. What is the future that it entails, and then how can we think otherwise? So thank you.
Thank you, Vipash, for the enlightening conclusions of the talk. Is anyone from the panel would like to say a word or two in response to Vipash conclusion? No. If not, we can invite Zoe to the panel. Would you like to say a few last words on the last day of the pollination program?
I wasn't going to, but then you asked and I said, okay. Hi guys, thank you so much for everything you've just shared. It was really interesting seeing as I've edited or read a lot of the contexts that you're working, and now I'm hearing you speak of it. I guess one of the things that I'm toiling in my head is these two prisms of extraction and extinction. And I think what really strikes me with the work of artists, at least, because it is based in a materiality, you are always pulling materials into new forms. It's almost as if, can it be possible for humans to create without a new form? Because isn't that creation of a new form in itself another materiality that is in itself consuming, a form of entropy in a constant state of production? We have Tita with a plastic island that becomes another island amongst fake and real. We have Forrest Curriculums talking about forest cities and new ideas of what is green and what is not emerges. I think it was wonderful to hear Elizabeth yesterday reinforce the way that mythologies become methods with which our memories are resurfaced. And what strikes me with the power of mythology is its telling as an immaterial form. And I'm quite struck by how cultures across the world rely on the verbal sharing of narrative as a means of conjuring new ideas of how to give image. And that has very much formed the backbone for a lot of what LIR and Kittima have realized in this pollination, is understanding how two mythical hunters, Barata on the Indonesian side, and then Tak Kongdeng on the other in Thai, and forgive me, I think I said that incorrectly. But what is quite dynamic about whether you're a writer, a historian, a filmmaker, a photographer, an architect, an anthropologist, we are all in the process of invention. And I think as cultural producers, I think it's quite important that we think about the materiality of that invention and where does it get archived and where does it matter. If we see, as we can read in Forrest Curriculum's text, where they talk about how algae is a natural form of it's a substance that we look at and we stereotype as ugly, negative, dirty. And yet it is nature's natural way of consuming and giving back. So one of the things that I am curious about all of our languages, about the fact that we've just spent 3 days talking about this, if nature is always in an ability with capacity to consume and transform, is that not what our capitalistic state powers rely on in their continuous push for change? Are they not saying to themselves, perhaps, nature can handle it. Nature will always be able to change and alter and transform. And I think the dilemma that we face as cultural producers is, as Agung raised yesterday, what is nature? Are we in a state where we actually in the 21st century need to start better articulating the mythic, the immaterial, the transformation of what we consider to be natural and not natural, and have them come together in a reimagination of what we consider to be human and non-human? I think it's dangerous when we talk about human and non-human, we're automatically assuming kind of like a biological matter. But in actuality, we're needing to think about what J.J. Rizal referred to as the Betawi, the spirit world, the understanding, the cemeteries hold so much, not only materialistic weight as it was once a human, but very symbolic cultural attachment to respect for sight. So I guess in a summation, I'm basically trying to say, I've learned a lot from not only the 3 days, and I thank you for anyone who else is still in the room. Apologies for the tech mishaps today, but this is all beautifully recorded on the huntersandgatherers.com website, and I do urge everybody to share it and to send it around because it has some very beautiful reflections on the curatorial missions of both LIR and Kittima for this pollination. And a very big thank you to Vipash, to Agung for being the curatorial advisors and walking with us in this journey, and a shout out particularly to Natasha Siddhartha and Eric Booth for having supported with Sam Fund for Arts and Ecology and the My Ian Museum of Contemporary Art. I really wish, ideally speaking, after a conference of 3 days, we are now going to go for a drink. And then we'd have a meal, and then we'd be able to share more and learn more. And then the next episode would happen. And it's really quite shocking how Zoom just becomes a red button that says leave meeting, which feels very cold and inhumane. But I do hope that we get to all hang out again another time, who knows where. But yes, thank you so much. And I'll hand it back to LIR. Thank you.
Thank you,
Zoe,
for the speech, and also
Yeah.
And maybe we are going to close the session, but before that, as the last day of symposium and also the whole program of Pollination 3 under the title of Hunters and Gatherers, we would like to say thank you to Zoe Bak from the Factory Contemporary Arts, Mbak Natasha Siddhartha from Sampan for Arts and Ecology, Eric Booth from Mayam Contemporary Art Museum, Mr. Sunario from Selasar Sunario Art Space, and Grace Center for Arts and Inquiry for supporting the whole program.
And to all of the speakers, Ruangsak, Anuwatiwimon, Maryanto, all of our artists, Prilatania, Forrest Curriculum, Abidjan, and Pujita, Elizabeth Inandia, Put, JJ Rizal, who's not here, but still amazing, Tita Salina, Napak Serirak, Sutirat Supaparinya, Vipash, Agung, Andy Wong Choi. We are very grateful that you are all in this together with us.
Yeah.
And also to all of the participants who come for the 3 days of this symposium, amazing. And to you who stays here, we would like to thank you.
And everything will be gathered in our website, www.huntersandgatherers.com, which everything
is compiled. So you can just open and it's there. Thank you. And finally,
this is the end
of everything, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And leave button. All right, yeah.